Welcome, dear friends, to a heartwarming story of unexpected reunions, second chances, and the discovery that family can be found in the most surprising places. Enjoy the story. The bustling farmers' market on the outskirts of small-town Millbrook was a hive of activity on that crisp autumn morning. Vendors called out their wares as the scent of fresh produce and baked goods wafted through the air. Among the crowd, a petite blonde woman in her early 30s navigated the stalls with her young daughter in tow. "Mommy, can we get some apples?" 6-year-old Emily tugged at her mother's worn jacket, her big blue eyes wide with hope. Sarah Miller glanced down at her daughter, her heart clenching. They had barely enough money for milk and a small cut of meat. Apples were a luxury they couldn't afford. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Maybe next time," Sarah said softly, steering Emily towards the dairy stall. As they approached, an elderly woman behind a produce stand caught Sarah's eye. The vendor's weathered face creased into a kind smile as she beckoned them over. "Come here, little one," she called to Emily. "I've got something for you." Emily looked up at her mother questioningly. Sarah nodded, and they approached the stand. The old woman reached into a crate and produced 2 large, gleaming red apples. "Here you go, darling. A treat for you." Emily's eyes lit up as she clutched the apples to her chest. "Thank you so much," she exclaimed. "Yes, thank you. That's very kind," Sarah added, touched by the woman's generosity. As they walked away, Emily's face shone with joy. "Mommy, why are the ladies at the market so nice?" Sarah smiled down at her daughter. "Well, honey, some people just have big hearts. They like to spread kindness where they can." Emily's brow furrowed in thought. "Do you think they have granddaughters?" "I'm sure some of them do," Sarah replied. "But not all of them?" Emily pressed. Sarah shook her head. "No, probably not all of them." As they made their way home, Emily's mind whirled with thoughts of grandmothers and granddaughters. She couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite fair about the distribution of grandparents in the world. The Miller women's home was a small, slightly dilapidated cottage at the end of Oak Street. Paint peeled from its weathered siding, and the porch steps creaked ominously. But to Emily, it was a castle. As they approached, Emily's eyes darted to the newer, larger homes that lined the rest of the street. She couldn't help but notice the stark difference. "Mommy, why is our house so much smaller than the others?" Emily asked innocently. Sarah's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "Well, sweetie, sometimes people have different amounts of money to spend on houses. Ours may be small, but it's filled with love, and that's what matters most." Emily nodded, accepting her mother's explanation. As they entered their tiny home, Sarah's facade of cheerfulness began to crumble. She sank onto their threadbare couch, a hacking cough racking her slender frame. "Mommy, are you sick?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with worry. Sarah tried to smile reassuringly. "It's just a little cold, honey. Nothing to worry about." But as the day wore on, Sarah's condition worsened. By evening, she was burning with fever, her face flushed and her breathing labored. "Emily, sweetie," Sarah rasped, "I need to run to the pharmacy for some medicine. Can you be a big girl and stay here by yourself for a little while?" Emily's lower lip trembled, but she nodded bravely. "Yes, Mommy. I'll be good." Sarah kissed her daughter's forehead. "That's my girl. I'll be back soon. Why don't you watch some cartoons while I'm gone?" As Sarah stumbled out the door, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Sarah hurried down the sidewalk, her vision blurring as she fought against the fever ravaging her body. She knew she shouldn't be out, but with no one to watch Emily, she had no choice. The small bell above the pharmacy door jingled as Sarah entered. The pharmacist, a kindly middle-aged man named Tom, looked up from his work. "Mrs. Miller, are you all right?" he asked, concern etching his features. Sarah gripped the counter for support. "Just need some cold medicine," she managed to say. Tom frowned. "You look like you need a lot more than cold medicine. Have you seen a doctor?" Sarah shook her head. "No insurance. No money for a doctor," she admitted quietly. Tom's frown deepened. He quickly gathered some over-the-counter medications and a bottle of electrolyte solution. "Here," he said, bagging the items. "Take these, and please, go home and rest. You're in no condition to be out." Sarah nodded gratefully, fumbling in her purse for the last of their money. As she stepped back out onto the street, the world began to spin. She stumbled, grasping at a nearby lamppost for support. "Ma'am, are you okay?" a passerby called out. But Sarah couldn't answer. The last thing she heard before losing consciousness was someone shouting for an ambulance. Back at the cottage, Emily sat anxiously by the window, her eyes fixed on the street outside. The cartoons played unwatched in the background as worry gnawed at her young heart. "Where are you, Mommy?" she whispered, her breath fogging the cool glass. As the minutes ticked by, Emily's anxiety grew. Finally, unable to bear the waiting any longer, she made a decision. Slipping on her jacket and shoes, she carefully locked the door and hid the key under the porch, just as her mother always did. The autumn air nipped at her cheeks as Emily made her way towards the pharmacy. Her heart pounded with each step, a mixture of fear and determination driving her forward. As she rounded the corner, Emily's eyes widened at the sight of flashing lights and a small crowd gathered outside the pharmacy. An ambulance was just pulling away, its siren wailing. "Excuse me," Emily tugged at a woman's sleeve. "Did you see my mommy? She came to buy medicine." The woman looked down, startled. "Oh, honey, was your mom wearing a blue jacket?" Emily nodded eagerly. The woman's face softened with pity. "I'm sorry, sweetie. A lady collapsed outside the pharmacy. They took her to County General Hospital." Emily's world tilted on its axis. But I need to go to her," she cried. "Oh, honey, you can't go alone. Where's your daddy or your grandma?" the woman asked. Emily's lower lip trembled. I don't have a daddy or a grandma." The woman exchanged worried glances with the other bystanders. "We should call child services," someone murmured. Panic gripped Emily's heart. She knew what that meant. She'd overheard her mother talking about it once. They'd take her away, separate her from her mom. Before anyone could stop her, Emily turned and ran, her little legs pumping as fast as they could carry her. She had to find help, but not from strangers who might take her away. And suddenly, she knew exactly where to go. The farmer's market was winding down for the day when Emily arrived, out of breath and red-faced. Her eyes darted frantically from stall to stall until she spotted a familiar face, the kind old woman who had given her the apples. "Excuse me," Emily panted, approaching the stand. Do you need a granddaughter?" The old woman blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, dear." Emily's words tumbled out in a rush. "My mommy's in the hospital and I need a grandma to take me to her, but I don't have one. So I came to find one, and you were so nice before, so I thought maybe you'd want to be my grandma, just for a little while, please." The old woman's eyes widened as she processed Emily's breathless explanation. By now, other vendors had gathered around, murmuring in concern. "Oh, you poor thing," the apple vendor said softly. "Of course we'll help you, won't we, ladies?" A chorus of agreement rose from the assembled women, but before they could formulate a plan, an elegantly dressed older woman pushed through the crowd. "Excuse me," the newcomer said, her voice filled with concern. "I couldn't help overhearing. Is everything all right?" Emily turned, confusion etched on her small face. The woman knelt down to Emily's level, her eyes brimming with an emotion Emily couldn't quite place. "Hi there, sweetheart. My name is Margaret. Can you tell me what happened to your mom?" Emily hesitated, glancing at the apple vendor for reassurance. The old woman nodded encouragingly. My mommy went to the pharmacy because she was sick," Emily explained, her voice quavering. "But she didn't come back. And I heard someone say she was taken to the hospital." Margaret's face softened with sympathy. "That must have been very scary for you. You're such a brave girl to come looking for help." Emily nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Margaret looked up at the assembled market vendors. "I'd be happy to take her to the hospital to find her mother. I'm a retired nurse, so I know my way around County General pretty well." The apple vendor placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "What do you think, dear? Would you like Mrs. Margaret to take you to your mom?" Emily hesitated, torn between her desperate need to see her mother and her wariness of this stranger. But there was something in Margaret's kind eyes that made Emily feel safe. Okay, Emily said softly. But can some of you come too? Just in case? The market ladies exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. Of course, honey, the apple vendor said. We'll all go together. Margaret smiled warmly. That sounds like a wonderful idea. Emily, why don't you and I lead the way, and your new market family can follow us? Emily nodded, relief washing over her. She slipped her small hand into Margaret's, and together they headed towards the hospital, trailed by a procession of concerned market vendors. With her new army of honorary grandmothers, Emily felt ready to face whatever came next, unaware that the woman holding her hand was more than just a kind stranger. The hospital waiting room buzzed with activity as Margaret approached the reception desk, Emily's small hand still clasped in hers. The market ladies hovered nearby, their arms laden with hastily gathered fruit baskets and home-cooked meals. Excuse me, Margaret said to the receptionist. We're looking for a woman who was brought in earlier today. Her daughter is here. She gently nudged Emily forward. The receptionist's eyes softened at the sight of the worried child. What's your mommy's name, sweetie? Sarah Miller, Emily replied quietly. As the receptionist typed on her computer, Margaret knelt down beside Emily. Don't worry, dear, we'll find your mom soon. A few moments later, a doctor appeared. Family of Sarah Miller, he called out. Margaret stood, still holding Emily's hand. We're here for Sarah. This is her daughter, Emily. The doctor's brow furrowed slightly. And you are? Margaret hesitated for a split second. A family friend, she said smoothly. How is Sarah doing? Mrs. Miller is stable, the doctor explained. She has a severe case of pneumonia, but we've started her on antibiotics. She's been asking for her daughter. Emily's face lit up. Can I see my mommy now? The doctor nodded, smiling. Of course. Follow me. As they walked down the sterile hallway, Emily's curiosity got the better of her. Mrs. Margaret, how did you know where to find the hospital? Margaret smiled gently. I used to work as a nurse here, sweetheart. I know this place pretty well. They paused outside Sarah's room. Margaret knelt down to Emily's level. Emily, I want you to know that no matter what happens in there, you've been so brave today. Your mom is going to be so proud of you. Emily nodded solemnly, then pushed open the door. Sarah's eyes lit up at the sight of her daughter. Emily, oh, thank God you're safe, she cried, reaching out her arms. Emily rushed to her mother's bedside, clambering up onto the hospital bed for a fierce hug. It was only then that Sarah noticed the other figure in the doorway. Margaret? She gasped, her face paling. What are you doing here? Margaret stepped forward hesitantly. Sarah, I know I have no right to be here, but when I saw Emily at the market looking so lost and scared, I couldn't stay away. Sarah's arms tightened protectively around Emily. You made it very clear 5 years ago that you wanted nothing to do with us, she said, her voice hard. Emily looked between the two women, confusion evident on her face. Mommy, do you know Mrs. Margaret? Sarah took a deep breath, her eyes never leaving Margaret's face. Emily, sweetheart, this is your father's mother, your grandmother. Emily's eyes widened in shock. But you said I didn't have a grandmother. I know, honey. It's complicated, Sarah said softly. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry, both of you. I was wrong, so terribly wrong. When John died, I was consumed by grief, and I lashed out at the wrong person. Sarah, can you ever forgive me? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching Margaret's face. Finally, she spoke. I won't pretend the past didn't happen. You hurt us deeply, Margaret. But... She glanced down at Emily, who was watching the exchange with rapt attention. But Emily deserves to know her grandmother. We can try. Margaret's face lit up with hope. Thank you, she whispered. I promise. I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to both of you. As if on cue, there was a commotion at the door. The market ladies had arrived, arms full of get-well gifts and bright smiles on their faces. Hope we're not interrupting, the apple vendor called out cheerfully. We just wanted to check on our honorary granddaughter and her mama. Emily giggled, her earlier fears forgotten. Mommy, look, I found lots of grandmas at the market. Sarah couldn't help but laugh, even as tears of relief and emotion spilled down her cheeks. She looked around the room, at her daughter's beaming face, at Margaret's hopeful eyes, at the kind faces of the market women who had taken a scared little girl under their wing. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with her fever. It felt like hope. It felt like family. "Well," she said with a watery smile, "I guess we have a lot of catching up to do." And as the room filled with laughter and the chatter of newfound family, Sarah knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The tiny house on Oak Street might be small, but their family had just grown bigger than she ever could have imagined.